Well, the easiest answer is that's just not true. What she just said is factually not true. I never lobbied under any circumstance. I never went in and suggested in any way that we do this. In fact, I tried to help defeat the Housing Act when the Democrats were in charge of the House. And if you go back and talk to former Congressman Rick Lazio, he'll tell you when we were passing housing reform while I was Speaker, I never at any time tried to slow down the reform effort. In fact, I helped him pass the reform bill. And I think sometimes people ought to have facts before they make wild allegations.
Yes, sure. Congresswoman?
Well, after the debate that we had last week, PolitiFact came out and said that everything that I said was true. And the evidence is that Speaker Gingrich took $1.6 million. You don't need to be within the technical definition of being a lobbyist to still be influence peddling with senior Republicans in Washington, D.C. to get them to do your bidding. And the bidding was to keep this grandiose scam of Freddie Mac going. That is something that our nominee can't stand for. We have to shut down these government enterprises, and we've got to end them. And I think that's shocking that he's saying that.
Let me just say two things.
Speaker Gingrich, quickly.
Yeah. Okay. I want to say two things. First, my policy is to break up both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. It is not anything like what she just described. Second, I want to state unequivocally for every person watching tonight, I have never once change my positions because of any kind of payment, because the truth is I was a national figure who was doing just fine, doing a whole variety of things, including writing best-selling books, making speeches, and the fact is I only chose to work with people whose values I shared, and having people have a chance to buy a house is a value I believe still is important in America.
Now to Neil Cavuto with questions about the economy.
Speaker Gingrich, not to make you a target, but
it goes with being right here.
You just responded this morning, sir, tweeted originally and then with follow-up statements as a major breakthrough of this plan on the part of Republican Congressman Paul Ryan working with Democratic Senator Ron Wyden to find a sort of an updated way to keep Medicare solvent, and this would involve a choice that those who like the program as it is can stick with it. There will be a private option, et cetera. But earlier on, this might have confused Congressman Ryan and others for whom you had said with his initial Medicare fix that it was right-wing social engineering. Later on, you backed off that comment, said that there was much you could find in Mr. Ryan's plan to like. Can you blame Governor Romney for saying you have a consistency problem on this issue?
I'm not in the business of blaming Governor Romney. I'm in the business of trying to understand what we can do as a policy. If you go back and look at the Meet the Press quote, it didn't reference him, and I'll come back and say it again. A free society should make very big decisions with the support of the people. Now, you can earn that support. You can win a communications argument. Reagan was very, very good at that. But the only point I was making on Meet the Press is when you're going to have a major change, you have to communicate with the American people in order to ensure that they are for you. Now, Governor Romney came up, frankly, with a very good variation on the Ryan plan, which allowed the maintenance of the current system. Paul has adopted that, and I think it a very brave act by Senator Ron Wyden. You now have a Democrat willing to co-sponsor the bill. I've endorsed the concept today. I think it is a big step forward, and I think Governor Romney deserves some of the credit for having helped figure out a way to make this thing workable. So I think it's a nice thing to actually have a bipartisan plan in Washington that we could actually look at in a positive way and hope would help save Medicare.
Governor Romney, do you want to respond to that compliment?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I hope people understand just how big today is for this country. We all understand that the spending crisis is extraordinary, with $15 trillion now in debt, with a president that's racked up as much debt as almost all the other presidents combined. But there's another problem we have, which is our national balance sheet, which are these obligations that we've made that we have no funding behind, and it adds up to $62 trillion. And today, Republicans and Democrats came together with Senator Wyden and Congressman Paul Ryan to say we have a solution to remove that $62 trillion. This is a big day for our kids and our grandkids. It's an enormous achievement. It means we finally have the prospect of dealing with something which has the potential of crushing our future generations, and a good Democrat and a good Republican came together. This is the impact of people on both sides of the aisle that care about America in a critical time, and I applaud it. It's good news.
Congressman Paul, as you've been warning, we are on the brink of another government shutdown because of spending that you've called out of control. But haven't you contributed to that spending problem yourself, sir, supporting over the years earmarks that have benefited your district and your state? Back in 2009, you explained this by saying, if I can give my district any money back, I encourage that. I don't think that the federal government should be doing it, but if they're going to allot the money, I have a responsibility to represent my people. Isn't that what they call a mixed message, Congressman?
Well, it's a mixed question. This is a problem because the real message is you should include in your question, also, you have never voted once for an earmark. No, it's a principle that I deal with because if the government takes money from you and you fill out your tax form, you take your deductions. I look at that the same way in our communities. They take our money, they take our highway funds, and we have every right to apply for them to come back. Matter of fact, it's a bigger principle for me than that. I think this whole thing is out of control on the earmarks because I think the Congress has an obligation to earmark every penny, not to deliver that power to the executive branch. What happens when you don't vote for the earmarks, it goes into the slush fund, the executive branch spends the money, then you have to grovel to the executive branch and beg and plead and say, oh, please return my highway funds to me. So it's this whole principle of budgeting that is messed up, but I never voted for an earmark, but I do argue the case for the people I represent to try to get their money back if at all possible.
But isn't that the same thing of having your cake and eating it too? You can complain about earmarks, but then if there are provisions there that help your district or your state, that's different. If 434 other members felt the same way, how would we ever fix the problem?
Yeah, but you're missing the point. I don't complain about earmarks because it's the principle of the Congress meeting their obligation. But if everybody did what I did, there would be no earmarks. The budget would be balanced and we'd be cutting about 80% of the spending. So that would be the solution. But you also want to protect the process. You want to emphasize the responsibility of the Congress in not delivering more power to the president. I would be a different kind of president. I wouldn't be looking for more power. Everybody wants to be a powerful executive and run things. I, as a president, wouldn't want to run the world. I don't want to police individual activities and their lifestyle, and I don't want to run the economy. So that's like an entirely different philosophy, but it's very, very much in our tradition and in the tradition of our Constitution.
Governor Perry, you said the only way to stop our spending problem is to get Congress to stop spending. Quoting you, sir, you said, I vetoed 82 bills in my first year as governor of Texas. I have a record of keeping spending under control. But as Texas Agriculture Commissioner, you oversaw a loan guarantee program that, as the Austin American-Statesman reported at the time, had so many defaults that the state had to stop guaranteeing bank loans to startups in the agribusiness and eventually bailed out the program with taxpayer money. So aren't you guilty of the same behavior you rail against as a presidential candidate?
Well, two things. Number one, don't believe everything you read in the Austin American-Statesman. And the second side of it is that we had that program put in place, and the state did not bail out. Those programs worked as they were supposed to work. Just like in any bank or any business, you're going to have some that fail. But I want to go back and talk about, just a second, the issue of where we had a big back and forth about whether Newt was involved in untoward activity or not. And I'll be real honest with you. The issue we ought to be talking about on this stage is how you really overhaul Washington, D.C. And the idea that you can't tell the difference between lobbying and consulting. The idea that we have Congress stay in there as many days as they do and the salary that they have. That's the reason I've called for a part-time Congress. Cut their pay in half. Cut their time in Washington in half. Cut their staff in half. Send them home. Let them get a job like everybody else back home has and live within the laws of which they pass. We do that and you pass a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution, and the conversations that we've been having up here will be minor.
By the way, Governor, they worked 151 days last year. How much more would constitute part-time?
I would suggest to you maybe 140 days every other year like we do in Texas.
Governor Huntsman, as you're probably familiar, sir, the Chinese have just slapped huge tariffs of up to 22% on imports of some American sport utility vehicles, larger American cars. Now, as a former ambassador to China and one who has argued for an adult conversation with Beijing, how would you respond to what some are calling a childish move on the part of a country that routinely flouts international trade rules?
Well, it's a large and complicated relationship. It's part trade, it's part North Korea, it's part Iran, part Pakistan, part Burma, part South China Sea, part military to military engagement. You move one end of the relationship, it impacts the other. The best thing to do, invite a few dissidents who are seeking freedom and want to expand democracy in China to the United States Embassy, the kind of thing that I used to do. That's what matters to the Chinese people who are looking for change and looking for reform these days. That's the kind of thing that over time is going to create an upswell of change and reform in that country that's going to make the U.S.-China relationship successful longer term, because eventually, we need more than just a transactional relationship. We need shared values infused into this relationship. Let's face it, the 21st century will only have two relationships that matter, the United States and China. For that to succeed, we need shared values. That's democracy, that's human rights, that's recognition of the role of the internet in society, that's greater tolerance toward religion, and so much more. As President of the United States, I would drive that home, and I would make it a relationship that worked.
Senator Santorum, right now American companies have trillions parked overseas because of the very high tax rates here. Would you support a tax holiday to bring that money back, but only under, as some Democrats have suggested, the condition that these companies hire workers with that money?
Yeah, what I proposed in my Made in the USA plan is that if money has been made overseas, that it can come back at a 5.5% rate, which is what we did back in 2004, and it did cause a lot of money to come back. But I put a special rate, 0, if they bring it back and invest it in plant and equipment in America. We need to rebuild the manufacturing base of this country. When I traveled around to all these counties in Iowa, I went to a lot of small towns like Sidney and Hamburg down in Fremont County, and I was in the other day in Newton, where they've lost jobs to overseas. Why? Because we're not competitive. We need to have our capital be competitive and come here free so they can invest it. We need to cut the corporate tax on manufacturers to 0. Why? Because there's a 20% cost differential between America and our 9 top trading partners, and that's excluding labor costs. We need to get our taxes down. We need to repeal regulations. I promise to repeal every single Obamacare regulation, every single Obama regulation that cost businesses over $100 million. I can repeal it. I can't repeal laws, but as a president, you can repeal regulations, and I will repeal every single one of them so business can get going in this country.
Thank you, Neil. This question is from Twitter, and it is for you, Governor Romney. At Leon James Page tweets, over the next 10 years, in what sector or industries will most of the new jobs be created?
The great thing is the free market will decide that. Government won't. We have in a president someone who, again, doesn't understand how the economy works and thinks that as a government, he can choose, for instance, which energy sector is going to be successful. So he invests as a venture capitalist in certain car companies that have electric battery power, not understanding that perhaps Toyota and GM could do a better job than Tesla and Fisker. The president decides to go into Solyndra because he thinks that solar power is going to be the future. Look, let markets determine what the future course of our economy will be. What do I happen to think will be the future? I think manufacturing is going to come back. I think manufacturing, for some of the reasons Rick just indicated, is going to come back to the U.S. I also think, of course, that high tech is going to be an extraordinary source of growth for a long time in this country. And energy. We have extraordinary energy resources in this country. Opening those up, our president holds them off, doesn't give them the permits to start drilling and getting the natural gas and oil. Those are some of the areas that are going to be extraordinarily powerful. This economy has every potential to continue to lead the world. Our president thinks America's in decline. It is if he's president. It's not if I'm president. This is going to be an American century.
Thank you, Governor Romney. Now to Megyn Kelly with the next round of questions, and this is a new topic, the judiciary.
This is something we have heard precious little about in this election, but something that's an important issue for a lot of voters. Speaker Gingrich, let me start with you. You have proposed a plan to subpoena judges to testify before Congress